Good morning. I'm Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. I'm being joined today for this edition of the Water Tower Small Cap Spotlight podcast by my colleague Doug Lane, Head of Consumer Products Equity Research, to discuss his key takeaways after attending ICR's well-respected annual consumer conference last week. Doug, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for doing this.
Doug, I know you were in Orlando last week to attend the annual conference held by our corporate friends at ICR. Please tell our podcast audience what the ICR conference consists of and why you decided to attend on behalf of Water Tower Research.
Yeah, the ICR conference has become a pretty big event in the consumer world. I mean, ICR was founded in the late 1990s by former sell-side analysts as an investor relations advisory firm. So they've been doing this a while, and they really started right from the outset to have these conferences showcasing their companies, mostly to the investment community. And now, of course, it includes the press and media, investment bankers, and everybody's there. It's become a pretty big deal. I think they said they had over 2,600 people attending last week, and of those, probably 20, maybe 500 were buy-side investors, and there were 225 companies if you include the private and the public companies. So yeah, it's become quite an event in the consumer space.
That's quite an impressive roster of attendees. So were there some overarching themes you picked up on this year at the ICR Consumer Conference, Doug?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the global players are obviously worried about currency given the strength in the dollar. I think on the inflation front, it was pretty muted down there. I mean, labor is still persistently there, and they're having to deal with that. But other than that, there's no real no real inflationary pressures. I mean, there's one-off stuff like cocoa prices and things like that. But on balance, they're not talking much about inflation and really not talking about raising prices this year. Balance sheets are better. A lot of companies delevered after the pandemic. So I think you could see some acceleration in M&A activity with a lot of repaired balance sheets out there for the acquisitive companies that are on the hunt. Another theme is something we've been hearing from 1-800-Flowers, which is a Water Tower Research client, and that is this idea of a bifurcated consumer, where the consumers at the high end want to spend, and they're willing to pay up. They want quality, they want bundles, and so there's not a lot of sensitivity at the high end, but at the low end, they're squeezed more by inflation, by rising mortgage rates and things like that. So the low end is still a little bit difficult for these companies. Also, a bit of optimism that e-commerce can return to growth after a couple of difficult years following the pandemic. So we'll see what happens there. I think the biggest uncertainty, though, Tim, as you can imagine, is around tariffs. All this talk about tariffs and not a lot of resolution. It's just out there. So people are having to start to think about it. So really, the only movement on that front is a sense that some companies are starting to build inventories. They want to, get their supply chains to a point where they have some time to react. So really, whatever happens over the next 3, 6, 9 months, they're going to try to buy some time so they can react and do the right thing. Just on that front, we had the tariffs at Trump 1.0, so the a lot of companies are already lessening their reliance on China, moving supply chains elsewhere in Asia and around the world. You could see, you see them accelerating the move to Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam and those kind of countries. And even the Chinese suppliers themselves are moving their businesses to these countries too, so they can keep their customers and have the product actually coming from outside of China. What else could these companies do? Certainly, they'll push back on suppliers, have them absorb some of the cost impact of the tariffs. The people were talking about exclusions. I mean, a lot of these companies don't have U.S. production. I mean, the whole idea behind tariffs is to protect U.S. industry, but a lot of these products that come in for consumer products companies don't have a U.S. supplier base. So what's the point of the tariffs? Also, a lot of companies at the conference are in healthcare. And so why would you punish the U.S. healthcare consumer? It just doesn't make sense. And also, they've noted in the past that when something like this comes down the pike, China tends to devalue its currency, so that could provide some relief as well. I will say that on the price front, I mentioned that really no outlook for pricing this year, given the current inflationary environment. But depending upon tariffs, we could see pricing as an offset there. These companies may have no choice depending upon how the tariffs actually materialize. Moving production back to the U.S. may make sense in some categories, like a high technology, low labor type of industries could easily move back to the U.S. and give them more, control over their supply chains.
Okay. Speaking of China, my recollection is that China has traditionally been a large market for many of the consumer companies you monitor. What were the prevailing themes you heard from company management teams last week at ICR regarding China?
Yeah, China really is, people are still downbeat on China. I think that the Chinese economy has been weak. It used to be the largest market for many of these companies, particularly direct sellers like Nu Skin. China used to be the largest market for Nu Skin, and now it's the fourth largest market. So it's already a lot smaller than it used to be. And given the economic difficulties there, also geopolitics, where there's a nasty pall being put upon foreign goods coming into the country, so geopolitics is weighing on them. Government's trying to stimulate the economy, but in China, instead of like here, where we go out and spend our stimulus, they save it. So it's not really helping the consumer there. So again, I think a difficult consumer environment will persist there. People were talking more about India, and I know that we've talked about India with Herbalife, another WTR client, and how India has become a very large market, much larger than China for them. And I think people are catching on that India is a big opportunity and are moving in that direction.
Okay. And then switching gears, given the large attendance at the event last week, were any of your water tower research coverage companies in attendance?
Oh, sure. We had LifeVantage there once again this year. They've been there for several years. And by the way, we just did a podcast with the CEO and CMO of LifeVantage last week. And I think it drops this week. And then we'll do a follow-up report as well this week, talking with the CEO and the CMO about the new mind-body GLP-1 system. And including new research showing synergies between mind-body and their flagship NRF2 Protandim product. So there's a lot going on there, and they really pre-announced. We've talked about this before, and business is good, and they reiterated what's going on with mind-body and articulated this new research that came out. But then over and above that, they talked about a pipeline. They do have 2 more GLP-1 support products in the pipeline. They have another, what they call a hero product in the pipeline. So they're good to go probably for the next. They have pretty good visibility on their new product flow going 2 or 3 years out. And then the last thing is GLP-1, the mind-body system was just launched in the US back in October. So starting in March, they'll start rolling it out to the international markets.
Great. And then just kind of wrapping up, Doug, anything else you picked up on last week at ICR's Consumer Conference that investors might find of interest?
Yeah, it was funny, timely too, because TikTok came up a couple times, and it's been in the press with again the politics there. But we had a couple companies citing TikTok as being really influential in the consumer space. In pet adoption, for instance, last year cat adoptions were 40% of the pet adoptions. In a typical year, it's 20%. And the reason that was given is that a lot of TikTok influencers are cat people. So, okay, I hadn't heard that before, but that's what they were talking about it in Orlando last week. And then there's a little company, a private company called iHerb, very global company, and they have, they provide online supplements. So it's like a marketplace for online supplements. And they said last summer, out of nowhere, a brand called Maui Babe Browning Lotion, it's a suntan lotion, Maui Babe Browning Lotion just took off. They got zillions of SKUs then, and all of a sudden they noticed this thing taking off, and they go research it, and it's trending on TikTok. So all of a sudden they get this big surge in a brand that they never even probably knew that they carried up until this TikTok influencer was out in the marketplace talking about it. So it was interesting.
Nothing ever ceases to amaze me with social media these days. Thank you for letting us glean insights into your key takeaways after attending ICR's Consumer Conference last week, Doug. To read Doug Lane's industry and company-specific equity research reports, as well as to access countless other small-cap equity research reports from Water Tower Research, please go to www.watertowerresearch.com.